It's fact and fiction, and we have one author who represents each of those disciplines. On my right, far right, we have Earl Swift, and he's the author of Chesapeake Requiem, which is a year with the watermen of vanishing Tangier Island, which is an island in the Chesapeake Bay that is slowly disappearing. Earl spent a year living with them and integrating with them and really getting to know the community. He's also written other books, all of which seem to have to do with water. There's Journey on the James, where he started out at the head of the James River in Virginia with his trusty plastic kayak and ventured all the way down as far as Hampton Roads. And it was not always an easy journey, but it's most entertaining if you read his book. We also have Kevin Seitz, who is basically a debut novelist. He's an experienced journalist and has written some rather harrowing books about his experiences as a journalist during wartime in the hot zone and things they cannot say about soldiers and the moral damage that's done to them. But he's had a change of pace with The Ocean Above Me, which is his first novel, and it's really, really interesting. But with the journalistic background, the two of them have a lot of crossovers in the books that they're presenting here. They both write about aspects of the fishing industry. Earl's written about the shrimping industry, and Kevin Kevin has written about the shrimping industry, and Earl has written about the crabbing industry. Both tough lifestyles, both dangerous lifestyles. And I think that they've both done an amazing job with their books. But I'm going to kick things off by asking them about whether these books, neither of them, I have to say, is going to have a happy ending. Tangier Island's disappearance is still evolving, and people are still hanging on there. But in The Ocean Above Me, the shrimping boat does go down. The question is, does anyone survive? And if they do, who does? What happens? I have to say, when I met Kevin yesterday for the first time, I told him that I read the book, I wasn't expecting it to be happy, but the ending blew me away. And I know I spoke to somebody this morning who said that they had to give up reading it, they couldn't get all the way through it, but you have to read it to the end because you will be amazed as well. But there's an aspect of this. Is it more difficult, do you think, Kevin and Earl, is it more difficult to read about somebody who's potentially dying? Or Earl, you kind of turned the page on that by being an aerial spotter when one of the Tangier Island men's boat went missing, and you were out searching. Do you think it's more difficult to write about being the victim or being the person or the people left behind? We're going to start off serious and then lighten up.
Before I begin with that, Peggy, I just got to say this is my first visit to Stewart. Bounced around Florida and other parts of the state over the years, but I've never been here. And I just want to thank you guys for, whether you've done it directly or indirectly, for making me feel so at home. It's been a great visit. Whether it's more difficult to write. Well, I mean, clearly it's more difficult being a victim than an observer to victimhood. But the fact of the matter, Peggy, is that I don't find writing easy, no matter what the heck I'm writing. I mean, it's work. It's difficult for me. You know, you would think that after doing it for a living for 46 years, it would get easier as you go. But sadly, that is not the case at all. If anything, I think it's more difficult now than it was when I was 22 and could just dash off something without even really thinking about it. I was a much more intuitive writer, I think, as a youngster, and now I've become a much more conscious and deliberate writer. And that's where the work is. That's, you know, where you're trying to make every word load bearing, and that's a meandering and abstract answer to a direct question, but that's what I got.
I wanted to second Earl's thank you and gracious welcome to us. I think we feel very at home here. And I want to say I'm so pleased to be at Bookmania. The other invitation I got was something called the Florida Man Games. I don't know if you've heard of it. So this is much better. I don't think there's going to be any cop chases or beer brawls or anything. So in terms of the question, thanks for starting off with the softballs. I spent the majority of my career covering conflict, and so much of that is parachuting into other people's misery. And that's a very difficult thing to do. In some cases, you feel parasitic. You know, you're asking families, you know, how do you feel now? What are you going to do next when you're burying your child? And it's never an easy thing to do. But I try to remind myself the reason that we're doing that is we're looking for the common humanity that we experience. How do we link each other together? What's the bridge that's going to connect us in this story? And so on the surface, it seems, you know, almost sadistic to ask those kind of questions, but it's necessary. And we begin to understand that so much separates us today, and we can dwell on those things, or we can find the things that connect us. And we're all going to die. We're all going to experience loss. We're all going to hopefully fall in love at some point. And you ask those difficult questions, and you can find the bridge to that story. And I think that's what we've tried to do in our reporting. So.
That's a great answer. Earl, you really became part of the community on Tangier Island, being there for such a long time. How did you deal with some of their reluctance to accept what was actually going on with what was happening to their island, that it was just erosion, just pieces of dirt falling off their island and nothing else?
Well, to clue everyone in, I'm assuming that many of you have not read the book. Tangier Island is a little speck of mud and marsh in the middle of the Chesapeake Bay at the widest point of the bay. You picture the Chesapeake as kind of a knife's blade estuary running down the East Coast. This is just below the Virginia-Maryland line, right where it gets to be about 30 miles wide. And it's been inhabited by Westerners since 1778. At one point, there were 1,300 people living there. There are fewer than 400 now, mostly because the island has been disappearing throughout the late 19th and throughout the entire 20th century. And that disappearance has accelerated as time has gone. So the challenge for anyone going into Tangier is that because this is an island in which everybody is descended from the same guy, the same one settler who got there in 1778. And because they're surrounded by a moat of 18 trillion gallons of water that have kept them sequestered from the typical American experience since day one, they're a little wary of outsiders. And they don't cotton necessarily to the views of the outside world. And one of the things they just have not bought from day one is this notion that what is consuming their island is part of a global phenomenon. They see it as simply wind-driven erosion. And they're failing basically to see that climate change and local weather are not mutually exclusive. You know, there's there's a relationship between the two, and that what's happening to their island, while wind-driven erosion is a big piece of the problem, is in fact part of a bigger global phenomenon. I never made the attempt to convince them that they were wrong on that. That wasn't my job. My job was to find out how they felt about things, you know. Which isn't to say that I didn't go in knowing what the science said. But my bigger problem was just getting them to accept the fact that there was an outsider living among them. And it took them a good long while to, it took them probably 6 weeks before they got the message in seeing me constantly, you know, on my bike where, on the island. It took that long for them to grasp that I was not going to be like every other reporter that had shown up on Danger, which is you show up, you spend a couple of days, and then you leave again, never to be seen, you know, on a repeat visit. Once they got the idea that I wasn't going anywhere, then they started to open up to me a bit.
Well, that's what struck me when I read about your role as an aerial spotter when the boat went down. It was lost during a really vicious storm, and there were 2 people on the boat, that they actually trusted you to go up and look for that missing boat.
Well, yeah, it's an island, so everybody pitches in. I mean, when you're, you know, life on an island is like life in a small town, except more so. I mean, everybody is accountable. Or nobody just kind of floats along not contributing. You can't do it. And so late in my stay, when a father-son crabbing crew went down in their dead rise in the midst of this, the 60, 70 knot storm, a squall that just sprang up. I mean, we not only went up in small planes looking for bodies, but dragged the bay, you know, with grappling hooks, which is a sobering undertaking. But yeah, I mean, by that time I'd been there for more than a year, and they, you know, the whole all hands on deck sort of mentality of the place. There was never a question as to whether I'd be expected to participate.
Well, that kind of reflects the character cast in your book, Kevin. It is literally all hands on deck because it's a shrimping boat, and even though the characters on your boat, the captain is a former military officer. She's a woman of color, and she's trying to make it, and this is the final voyage of the season. She's hoping to hit it big so that she can at least make some money for herself and the crew on the way back. And things do not go as planned. Again, the unexpected storm, but the interdependence and the way Lucas Landon, who's the journalist who's traveling with them on this boat to record their stories, the way they interact with each other is very interesting. I wondered what you based some of your characters. There's the Ortiz, who's attached to the Philomena, the boat itself, because he sailed on her before when he escaped from Cuba as a child. And then there's Chewy, sort of, is it Chewy?
His name is, yeah, Chewy's the nickname, Jesus.
Chewy,
yeah
Jesus. He's kind of the bad boy on board. And there's the crew member who deals with his addictions by whittling, and he does genius whittling. And there is a chef who wears a fisherman's vest. We're all familiar with that, living down here. But instead of having flies in his vest, he's got spices, all kinds of spice packets in all of his pockets. It's amazing when you read about it. I was hungry reading both of these guys' books. But how did you come up with some of these wonderful characters?
I have to applaud your memory, Peggy, though. To remember all these details is pretty remarkable in itself. So, I think Earl probably feels the same way that I do. As a journalist, you carry people with you wherever you go. You take them with you. Some stories are kind of benign, some are haunting, but at the same time, each of them becomes a part of you. And I'll assume that you haven't read the book yet either, hopefully that you will. But the setting basically is aboard a shrimping trawler, and it's owned by a black captain, kind of a rarity in South Carolina in the fishing fleet. And the journalist that's coming on board is embedding with the shrimping trawler, and he's basically at the tail end of his career. He's coming back from covering war in Iraq and Afghanistan, suffering from PTSD, and he's got a terrible secret. By the way, I just want to ask all of you, because this will help you to understand the little book, how many of you have had a really deep, dark secret that has been eating at you that you wanted to share with someone, but you haven't been able to do? Raise your hand if that's the case. So many of you, just a few honest people here. I know that you all have that. That will help you to relate to the main protagonist, Landon. He's got a deep, dark secret, and his career has been on a tailspin. He's fallen from these major newspapers to smaller, minor newspapers, and he feels like this is going to be redemption for him. It ends up being redemption, but in a very different way. So he comes on board this shrimping vessel that is going out, and he's basically chronicling what's going to happen. And they're, as Peggy mentioned, in their last voyage of the seas, and they need to make up a shortfall where they're going to be in the red, and the captain can possibly lose her boat. Well, she ends up losing her boat in a storm off the Atlantic. The vessel capsizes and sinks to the bottom. Landon finds an air bubble, and he is able to stay alive at the bottom of the ocean for a period of time. You'll find out if you read it. But you can't necessarily base the whole book in this tiny air bubble. So he's obviously flashing back on his deep, dark secret from the wars, but also the connection that he made with the crew. And it becomes a very powerful thing, because each of these crew members, as different as they are, the black captain and her daughter Olvida, who's come on board as a deckhand, a junior who's, for lack of a better description, could be considered kind of a redneck. There's Chewy, and there's Lorenzo, the first mate, and his nephew, who have come from Cuba. So all of these different people, but Landon is able to find a connection with all of them in some ways. And sometimes as journalists, we treat our sources as ATM machines. We talk to them and we extract things from them without giving back. But in this particular case, the crew is going to have none of that. They make Landon share some of his stories as well. Before they're willing to give up, part of them, something that's very personal, they ask him for his stories. And that connection, that bond becomes very close. And it's something that helps to drive his hope for survival because of that connection with those characters. In terms of answering your question, Peggy, how do you come up with them? I think part of that are people that I've been exposed to, people that I've met in my journey, but also I have to mention this, in terms of the character Landon, you all might be a little suspicious when an author's protagonist has the same day job that the actual author has. You might think that he's stealing from himself or she's stealing from herself, and in some cases that could be true. There's the old adage, write what you know, correct? I want to basically assert that this is not autobiographical. Landon's had a much more difficult life and career than I've had. Although you take elements of what you've experienced to give it that patina of realism. And for instance, I've never been trapped in the bottom of an air bubble in a ship, thankfully, and I hope it never happens. But what I did want to assert in that character is a certain loss of agency, a loss of freedom, and how does that happen? And so I was able to delve into my own personal experiences, and one of them that was very challenging for me was in the war in Iraq, the U.S.-led war in Iraq in 2003. Just a month into it, my crew and I were captured. We were captured by the Fedayeen. This is a group that was fanatically loyal to Saddam Hussein. And I actually had made a mistake. I took our crew into Tikrit, which was Saddam's hometown. It was the only city that hadn't fallen. And at that moment, we were captured. And it was the scariest experience that I've ever had in covering conflict. And all the things that you don't want to happen happened at that moment. We were taken from our vehicles. We were put on the side of the road. We were put in what's called the execution position. Hands on your heads, kneeling down. And each of us felt in the notch of our skull an AK-47. And we thought, this is over. And I really assumed at that point my short and uneventful life was over. And I thought about my deep, dark secrets and the people that I hadn't made connections with and the things that I hadn't done. And I was able to take that experience with me and imbue it in the character and try to understand that same loss of agency, that same loss of freedom that I experienced. I was able to kind of translate to Landon. So you do steal things from your own life. You know, you're not taking it whole cloth, hopefully, but you're taking those experiences, and that provides the sense of realism that you're looking for when you shift from nonfiction to fiction.
Well,
Peggy, if I could interject, you know,
yes?
you said something that brought something to mind, Kevin, and that is that I think that if you ask reporters who have been reporters for a while, how they can, you know, how they distinguish a good reporter from a bad, for me, it doesn't come down to whether you're efficient at getting the facts so much as whether you can have a transaction with your source and not have that source feel as if he or she has been exploited, that you've had an exchange, a human exchange. And yeah, just want to throw that out. There's so much debate about the role of the press and
It's got a bad reputation sometimes.
Yeah, because there are people,
practitioners that do that.
There are people who, in their rush, and a lot of it's deadline driven, but in their rush to get information, just trample over anybody.
Well, your commitment to be in a community for over a year got the kind of reporting that you needed to get an award-winning book. I mean, so that speaks volumes to what it can achieve when you actually have a relationship with someone.
Yeah, I mean, relationships are the whole reason to do it. I mean, when you get down to it.
And of course, I asked Earl yesterday whether or not he's still in touch with the people at Tangier, and he is.
Oh yeah.
So.
Always will be. I mean.
One of the sad things is when I was looking up, I watched videos of Tangier Island, and where you have these reporters who just bounce in for the afternoon and do their report, and then they're gone. But some of them are longer, and there was one called Voices of Tangier, and I told Earl that an unidentified woman was speaking on this video, and I said to myself, based on reading Earl's book, that has to be
Carol Moore.
Yeah. And because everything she was describing that she does, going to the upids every day and beachcombing and looking for things and finding gravestones that have been eroded, the graves have been eroded, and they find pieces of the skeletons on the beach there because of that everything that she did in the book, she was talking about, and there was her name in the final credits. She was so easily recognized by the way that Earl wrote about her. So of course I asked him if he was still in touch. And the only thing that's really bad, because he has a better diet in the Chesapeake Requiem than he had on his Journey of the James, where he basically ate mac and cheese and tuna all the time.
It's pretty healthy.
Yeah, not really healthy, but he described going to Fisherman's Corner, which is one of the restaurants that was on the island. So I had to look it up, of course, and the menu was there, but it did say temporarily closed. Yeah, and he filled me in because he's in touch. What?
Well, Tangier has the misfortune of having two kind of agents of doom looming over it right now. Not only is it disappearing physically, and the island is sinking as the water comes up, so it's a double whammy that's facing it physically, but it's suffering a demographic collapse at the same time, and they're interconnected in the sense that no one new is going to show up on Tangier to live there, because who wants to live on a sinking, shrinking island? You're not going to get anyone buying houses there. So as people die, and the island is always skewed towards I mean, I think the average age at this point is 61 or 62, and that's the average. As the population shrinks just due to attrition, there's no replacement, and so you see this nosedive in the head count over the last 20, 30 years. And the problem on an island is that when that happens, it's, if the grocery store in your small town closes in the American South, say, it might be pretty doggone inconvenient, but you get in your car and you drive 10 miles to the next town over, and you go to the grocery store there. Well, that's not an option on Tangier. So as the population shrinks, there are a number of key community assets that depend on a critical mass of customers. Yeah, the grocery store being one, the mail boat, which despite its name is actually a private family-run business, the sewage treatment plant, and most especially the K through 12 school, the only combined school left in the state of Virginia, which when I first visited Tangier in 1999 rather, had 100 students and now has 52. And the problem is, of course, it's a K through 12. So all of the high school teachers have to be certified to teach their subjects. So you can't reduce the number of teachers, but so much. So right now, Tangier has a student-teacher ratio of something like 3 to 1. And it's in the poorest county in the state, which can't maintain a school like that with almost, individual instruction for long. So,
Actually, I have a related question to that, Earl. It came from the audience. It says, you say that residents of the island view others as outsiders. How do the residents find mates? And are there issues from interbreeding because of shared DNA?
Great questions, natural questions. They find mates largely on the island. Everybody's a cousin or closer, but that has been overlooked generally over time. Now, you would think that the results would be a population that looks like the British royal family, but in fact, Tangiermen are beautiful. Now they have a terrible diet. They have an all-fried food diet, so by the time they get to 28, 29 years old, they pop like popcorn kernels generally, but up until then, they are gorgeous. And male and female look like models. It's weird. There's very little resemblance, from one strain of the family to the next. You wouldn't know that they're all cousins or closer. And there's just enough bringing mates in from the outside to keep things from hitting genetic dead ends.
That really is a good question, because I wondered that when I was reading the book too.
It could be a lot worse.
Kevin, I have a question for you from the audience. What happened when you were all at gunpoint to allow you to be here today? You never told us the end of the story.
I didn't finish that story, did I? Obviously, we lived, but I think this is a good opportunity to share the importance in our profession of what we call fixers, people that we work with that help us to be introduced in a certain community. For instance, when I'm reporting overseas, I very seldom speak any other language besides English. So if I'm in a different country speaking Arabic or French or any other language, you need someone to not only translate, but to help you navigate both the physical and literal, the physical and actual landmines that you might be experiencing in that particular country. So in this case, when we were held captive, we had a fixer, a translator who was Kurdish, and he was a man that was, not certainly impressive to us initially. He was a little bit shorter, portly, and we were kind of concerned whether he was going to be able to do the job. This was kind of a hardship position. We were camping out in the desert and so on, and he ended up having a lion's heart. So when we were captured, he started arguing with our captors and saying, "You release them immediately." He wasn't begging for his life or our life. He yelled at them at the top of his lungs. And we found out later that he bent the truth a little bit. He didn't tell them that we were journalists. He told them that we were an advance team for the U.S. Army, and that if they didn't release us, they were going to be bombed back into the Stone Age. Now, I had no idea any of that was going on because he's saying this in Arabic, and at the same time, they're calling him a double traitor. You're a Kurd, we don't like you because of that, and you're also working for the Americans. And they pulled him out into the desert at a certain point, and they were going to shoot him before us, which would have been a terrible outcome because we had no one to intervene for us. But he got them to stop. He talked to them and basically yelled at them and screamed at them, and eventually found someone within the group that was a bit more reasonable. They went and they found the village elder. The village elder was brought back, and he believed what Tawfiq, our fixer, was telling them, and he got us taken from the Fedayeen and put into the possession of the village elder, and so we were under his protection, and he kept us for a day, and eventually got back one of our vehicles. We had 2 vehicles. All of our equipment was stolen. I had $20,000 in my pocket, which was considered get out of jail money. The Fedayeen found that right away, and they didn't get me out of jail. They stole that. But they got back one of our vehicles completely stripped down except for the wheels and the steering wheel. And at the end of the day, they put us in that, and we were able to drive back into the American lines. And so we were okay. Strange story, I was with CNN at the time, and they were very unhappy with what I had done, nearly getting my crew killed. I had disobeyed them to get there. You know, some of the energy and the aggressiveness that didn't really work out. They fired me. I went back to Iraq for NBC, and I ended up in the same place. And after I came back, I actually embedded with a military unit in Tikrit, in the city where I was captured. And this has now fallen to the Americans. And one morning, one of the American officers came to me and said, "Seitz, we need you to come to the Tactical Operations Center. So we want to show you something." And I got there, and he showed me a picture of some of this equipment they captured. And it was a tripod and camera equipment with CNN on like, just like, have you been here before? Because I'm terrible. I label everything. I have my name on there. So eventually, you know, the reason that the village elder let us go was we wrote a letter saying, you know, this gentleman helped us when we were captured. Please do not rape and pillage his village. You know, leave him alone. He's a good guy. And he showed this to the Americans and to the Kurds that came in, and basically he was left alone. And we actually ended up meeting with him again later. So all ended up well. But it was a very scary moment. So.
One of the things that we had talked about a little bit when we met yesterday was the covers of the books. I find cover art very interesting. What's even more interesting about Kevin's book is that he knows the model on the cover. And we were talking about how the cover came to be. And after you tell us a little bit about your cover, Kevin, Earl, can you tell us about your cover, and was this really the title that you picked for this book?
Okay, I hate to do this on camera because I don't want my publisher to see this and be angry with me, but very often, I think Earl will confirm this, we have arguments with our publishers about what the covers look like, especially if you're an emerging author. I know I'm too old to look like an emerging author, but I am in fiction at least. You feel the cover is very important, and you have an idea in your mind what you want to relate. In this particular case, I was sending to Harper's all of these images that I had pulled from the internet of someone underwater, you know, reaching for the surface, very much what I have here right now. But the art department was coming back with something that did not look anywhere near that. And I got very frustrated at a certain point, and I said, listen, I'm gonna ask a couple friends to shoot the cover for me. I had just spent some time in Indonesia working as a dive master on an ecological project, monitoring hawkbill turtles and restoring coral. And I made friends with the proprietors there, the dive master that was in charge of the shop, and his girlfriend, who was a photographer. And so I asked them, I said, you know, we had talked about the book a little bit before I had left, and I said, could you actually take a picture of this image for me that I have in my mind? I sent them the same type of images that I had been sending Harper's, and in 2 shots, they captured this, which is exactly what I wanted. And the model is actually the head of the dive shop, and his girlfriend was the one that took the picture. All this time, Harper's telling me, you know, we may use it, we may not. I don't think, it's probably a waste of your time. And as soon as they saw the image, they go, we're gonna use that, and we'll pay them as well. So that ended up on a happy note.
Good.
Yeah, I don't want to pile on Harper, because this is true of every publisher, but Kevin and I happen to share a publisher in these 2 books. And it may surprise you to find out that at least on the nonfiction side, we don't have final say on the titles of our books. Now, the only thing that I have a final say on the cover is my own name, really, when you get down to it. And so there have been I've had some knockdown, drag out disputes with editors in the past over titles, and Chesapeake Requiem was not my original title. My original title was The Sea Is Come Up, which is the King James version of a line from the book of Jeremiah. And I just liked the weird, crazy grammar of it more than anything, and the old soundingness of it. And I guess I should have explained also, Tangier is a theocracy of the Methodist Church, and not like mainland Methodism. This is mid-19th century Shoughton Methodism, the Lorenzo Dow kind of Methodism. And so The Sea Has Come Up really appealed to me, kind of wrapped Tangier's character into the story of an ecological disaster unfolding. But my editor said, there's no way we're going to call this The Sea Has Come Up. And they got the marketing people involved at the publishing house, and he came back to me and said, well, the directions I'm getting is that they want one of two words in the title. The title either has to have Chesapeake in it or crab. And I was like, well, I can tell you right now, there's no way in a million years that book's going to have crab in the title. If it does, my name's not going to be on the cover. But I had my marching orders. I had to come up with something involving Chesapeake. So the beauty of Requiem, in addition to describing the island's demise, soon to be extinction, is that it's got great assonance. The two words Chesapeake Requiem, I mean, they just work almost musically. And that was not my doing. That was the product of desperation, but it turned out to be okay.
And didn't you sort of get your way by naming one of the sections of the book?
Yes,
The Sea Has Come Up?
Yes, I did.
Nice, way to get it back. If I could just interject too, I think sometimes your editors are correct though in helping you. My original title for this book was called The Beautiful Whole. Didn't want to offend anyone. I thought it was perfectly rated G. My wife, my agent, and my editor all said, that's not the right title for this book. So I spent quite a bit of time coming up with this one. So sometimes you have to listen to your editors, and you definitely have to listen to your wife.
I did want to ask you, and this is also a question from the audience, what is up next for you? I know that, Earl, you're in the middle of doing a walk on the Appalachian Trail, and is that going to be the inspiration for your next book?
Well, my next book comes out in a month. It's already done.
Okay, so tell us about that.
Well, it's about a 1921 mass murder in rural Georgia that opened America's eyes to the fact that slavery had not ended with the Civil War. A case that was huge news coast to coast when it unfolded. A plantation owner in southeast of Atlanta who wiped out his entire workforce to destroy evidence in a federal case that was being put together against him. But it's one of those weird, huge international stories that just kind of disappears afterwards and is faded from the public memory altogether. So that's
what's that going to be called?
That's called Hell Put to Shame.
Ooh,
I did come up with that title, by the way.
And that's coming out in a month.
Huh?
That's coming out in a month?
April 2nd.
But you're already working on your next project.
Yes, because I enjoy eating 3 meals a day. So I have to do that. It's so yeah, the next one I'm through hiking the AT. I've through hiked it once before. My first trip on the AT was somewhat colored by a series of tragedies that occurred that year, 1990. So I'm getting a do-over and hoping that I can find a story in there. I'm not exactly sure what it is yet, but I figure the longer I walk, the better. So I've done about a third of it so far. I'll finish the southern half while the weather remains cold, and then I'll jump up and do the northern half.
He showed me pictures today of what some of the trail looks like, and it's snow covered, so he's a lot braver than I would be. But Kevin, what do you have?
Earl is such a slacker, I just want to say, you know. You're going to probably have a hard time finding him to sign his books because he's going to be piled on both sides of him. I just finished a second novel, and it's called Freedom's Deep. And I'm thinking of kind of this possibly being a trilogy. The first book, The Ocean Above Me, was about the consequences of not telling the truth when you bury the truth. In this particular novel, a foreign correspondent comes back to his hometown in Ohio. He buys his local newspaper, and in doing so, he starts to settle scores with a column he calls Better Forgotten. These stories and rumors which people are not very happy to hear about. He's bringing them back to life. So the truth has some consequences, but it's interesting because Earl's book also deals with the Civil War. This has a Civil War connection. The editor begins to hear a rumor about a murder that happened during the Civil War time period in this hometown. And the hometown has a strong connection to the abolitionist movement and the Underground Railroad. And so the more he begins to dig into this rumor and find truth through these old journals and the research that he does, the bigger the story becomes, and it poses great consequences if he actually publishes the story. It could turn the whole town upside down, and in fact, it may even have a connection to his own newspaper. So a Civil War mystery kind of combined with this journalistic Sturm und Drang. So
That sounds interesting. And you're even thinking about going beyond that.
there should be a third book dealing with the truth, and I'm playing with that in my mind right now, but I think Earl put it well. If you have to keep writing if you want to eat, right?
I am so glad you are going on with the fiction, though, because I so enjoyed your first attempt at fiction. Do you think you'll ever write fiction, Earl?
Nope.
That was short and
Just
sweet.
not even interested, because I can't make up the crazy stuff I've wound up writing about. I mean, my imagination's not nearly as good as reality. Crazy stuff happens.
Oh. I have a question from the audience, and it's for both of you. How do you get yourself in the mindset for writing? Do you have to be in a particular place or a particular mood, or do you set goals for yourself on a daily basis?
If you wait to be inspired before writing, then you will never write, and you'll starve to death. The fact is, inspiration has nothing to do with it. You have to sit down. And this is a rude way to say it, you sit your ass down at the keyboard and you start typing. And sometimes what you type is awful and doesn't see the end of the day. Sometimes what you type lays the groundwork for later fixing and polishing and whatnot. And sometimes it's absolutely brilliant. You can't believe you wrote it. But inspiration has nothing to do with it. And the setting really has nothing to do with it either. You have to, if inspiration does visit, and occasionally it does, stuff comes to you that you cannot explain, undeniably. But it's always while you're already working. It's never while, you can't sit around by candlelight waiting for the muse.
Oh.
There ain't no such thing. So, this is left brain work as much as it's right brain. You construct stories. It's engineering as well as art. And anyway, yeah.
I think we also benefit from the fact that being journalists, we've had a deadline looming over us forever, and so you have to write.
Yeah,
you can't miss a deadline. It's the worst thing that you can do in journalism. Well, not the worst, but one of the worst as far as your editors are concerned. So that pressure, it kind of carries over whether you're writing nonfiction or fiction. For me, I have to say, I hate writing. I love rewriting. I give myself permission to write the worst first draft ever. I mean, I read it back sometimes and I'm horrified. No business being in this career. And you understand, as Earl said, that it lays the framework. It gets your ideas down on paper, and you can usually do that fairly quickly. And when you go back, you're almost looking forward to the process of revising that and pulling the structure together and creating the characters. And it does stay with you all day long. When I stop writing, I can usually do, on a good day, I might be able to do 6 hours.
that's quite a stretch, but normally it could be a little bit more, a little bit less. But when I'm rewriting, you can really do the full day of this, and you can focus on it. And when you stop, those ideas never stop. They follow you into your sleep and into your dreams. Stop thinking about how can I improve this. On that track, lo and behold, I have a book. So,
and it's not hatred of writing that I feel. I guess the thing is, it's not fun exactly, but it's satisfying when you're actually in the process of it. And the closest I can come to describing it is, it's like working a really difficult Sudoku, where you're just stumped, and it's frustrating as hell, and you just can't seem to get the numbers to work. That's my everyday when I'm writing. I'm in this state of near rage with my inability to put things together the way I want to. But you keep at it. Eventually, it gets closer and closer. And the whole process of making it as mechanically clean and propulsive and as I said earlier, load-bearing, where every word is a load-bearing component of the sentence in which it appears. Every sentence is a load-bearing component of its paragraph, and so on and so on. If you get that so that the words, that the sentences are as clean as a hound's tooth, there are no speed bumps between the reader and the end of the story. That it's an enormously frustrating process, but really, really satisfying if you achieve it.
I think I have one last question for you, Earl, from the audience. It says, how much of your book did you actually write while you were on Tangier? And what were the reactions from the people of Tangier when they read about themselves in your book, or did they?
I did not write a word of the book while I was on Tangier, but I would go home occasionally to cut the grass and whatnot. And while I was home, sometimes I'd spend a couple of days writing. But generally, for the most part, I wrote the book after I was done reporting, which is not typical, but it was necessary there. Just, I was deeply immersed in day-to-day life. Now, when the book came out in August of 2018, and I felt that the first reading had to be on Tangier. My daughter was filled with trepidation about that because she knew it was a warts and all view of the island, and she knew that there were going to be things in the book that would deeply displease the people of Tangier, and she was afraid that my visit would end the way The Wicker Man did, if you're familiar with that movie. But I went back there, and they had opened the school cafeteria / auditorium for the occasion, and Tangiermen packed in, and I did a reading and talked about the book and opened it up to Q&A, and instead of asking questions, Islander after Islander stood up, and many in tears testified like we were in church about me, about my girlfriend who had come to visit me a number of times while I was there, about the book. And the gist seemed to be that while there was a lot in the book they would have loved to have not seen in there, they found themselves nodding in recognition as they read it, and it seemed to capture the Tangier that they knew. So I was pretty happy to hear that. Turned out well.
Well, unfortunately, we're running out of time, and I think we could go on for quite a bit because you've both had a number of interesting things to say, and there's so many more questions to ask you. But at this point, I'm going to thank you, Earl, for your book. It's going to be on sale in the Nutrition Center across the way. Make sure that you get it before so you can have Earl sign it. Likewise, Kevin's first novel, The Ocean Above Me, will also be available, and I think we really want to encourage Kevin to continue with his fiction career. Thank you so much for being here.
I just want to say thank you so much to the Library Foundation of Martin County, Janette, Peggy, all the volunteers that have come here today. This is a marvelous event. I think Earl and the rest of the writers that are here have been very impressed.
And there's a lot of books out of there. There's a lot of books, a lot of competition, but a finite number of readers. And so when your book gets pulled from the stack and someone shines a light on it, it means the world. So I'm really grateful for all that. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.